Hello world, I'm Whitney Bandel and welcome to another video from my HTML and CSS course. In this video we will be looking at forms. So let's go ahead and open up our text editor and we'll create a new file. And let's just save this to the desktop for now. I'll just call this forms.html. Go ahead and open this up. Then start out like we always do. For the title, let's call this form elements. And for now, we're not going to worry about styles. We have a lot of different things to kind of cover just within the HTML itself. So to start off with, we have the HTML form itself, which is the web page user interface. So when you're working with forms, you have two different parts. There's the HTML form itself, which is the web page user interface, and then you also have partnered with it the server-side processing, which works with the form data and sends email, writes to a text file, updates a database, or performs some other type of processing on the server side. And if you go to Canvas, we'll go ahead and take a look at this together. Some of this might not quite make sense right away, but I'd rather us take a look at this before we start actually coding. Alright, so I just kind of put together this real quick PowerPoint to just kind of go over the essential information when looking at server-side processing. So with server-side scripting, the server-side scripting is a technology in which a server-side script is run on a web server to dynamically generate web pages. Examples can include PHP, Ruby on Rails, Adobe ColdFusion, Sun Java Server pages, and Microsoft.NET. This uses direct execution. The script is run either by the web page server itself or by an extension module to the web server. Now, when you are working with invoking server-side processing, you'll follow these steps. A web page invokes server-side processing either by using an attribute on a form or by a hyperlink. Any form data that exists is then passed to the script. The script is processed and may generate a confirmation or response web page with the requested information. So the first part would be figuring out where this information is going to be going to. So here we say invokes either using an attribute on a form or by a hyperlink. Then we have any form data that exists. So this is the data inputs that you provide and that the user would fill in. And then once that information is filled in, you might have a submit button or something like that, where the information is then sent to the server script, and then from that information you will send a confirmation or response back to the web page that the user would see. There are two different types of form method attributes, get or post. There are a couple things that you need to be in agreement on when you are working either as the web developer or the server-side programmer. You need to agree upon certain terminology and different types of information that is going to allow the website to communicate with that server-side script. So you have to agree on if you're going to use get or post, the form action attribute URL of the server-side script. So you need to make sure that where you're sending the information is agreed upon. And then any special form element controls expected by the server-side script. We'll also take a look at how you actually use IDs or how you name the elements in your form. So the method attribute is used on the form tag to indicate the way in which the name and value pairs should be passed to the server. Get causes the form data to be appended to the URL, which is easily visible and not as secure. Post does not pass the form information in the URL, but passes it in the entity body of the HTTP request, which makes it more private. W3C now recommends that you use the post method. Privacy policy. A privacy policy lists the guidelines that you develop to protect the privacy of your visitors' information. Websites either indicate this policy on the form page itself or create a separate page that describes the privacy policy and other company policies. You should include a privacy notice in your site to inform your visitors how you plan to use the information they share with you. So that way they know exactly who's going to have access to that information and what it will be used for. So that's just kind of a real short summary of helpful information. And you can find that again on week 6 on Canvas. There's not a lot of resources this week to take a look at. We're mostly just going to be working in our text editor. So again, we have the HTML form itself, which we'll be creating. And then there would be the server-side processing, which we're not actually going to look at ourselves, but we would set up a form that could get passed on to a script that would handle the information. Your textbook has a couple of examples where they are already providing a location to send the information to. So I would recommend making sure that you do all of those examples, and then if needed, you can always use their kind of confirmation page as an example, link it to the code that we're using. That should be fine. Alright, so we're going to start with our form element. So we're going to go to body, we're going to type in form, and our form element is going to have a couple different parts. There's going to be the action, which indicates where to send the form information. You can use autocomplete on or off. This will allow the browser to autofill in information if your browser saves that kind of information. You can add an ID. This is optional, but it provides a unique identifier for the form. We talked previously about the benefits of using classes versus IDs, and this is one of those instances where it would be preferable to use an ID to indicate a certain part of that form. Then there's the method getPost, like we looked at in the PowerPoint. Post is preferred by W3C and is more private and transmits in the body of the HTTP response. Then there is going to be the option of adding in name. This is optional, but it makes it easier to access information by the client-side scripting languages. So it might get a little confusing because what we're going to do is we're going to add IDs, but we're also going to add names. And you have to just remind yourself, IDs are going to be for the style of the form, and name is going to be a way to associate the information, so that way when you send it to a server and it's expecting certain information, it kind of knows how to parse through that information. It understands that the category for, let's say, last name is going to go and be handled in a certain way that the server ends up wanting to handle the last name information. And you need to agree upon those names, again, with whoever is in charge of the backend development. Alright, so we're going to create an example using this form element. So we already have our form. We're going to add in name equals, we'll say order, we'll do method, we'll say it's going to be post, we're going to give it an ID, we'll call it order, and we'll give it the action, and we'll say demo.php. So this file doesn't actually exist. This would be the name, though, of the file of where you want to send this information. And then we'd have our end tag, which is going to be the form. All right, so within our form, we're going to have form controls. The first groups we're going to look at are all going to be input elements. They're all going to be the same input element, but they're going to have different types. So there's actually a lot of different types you can look at within the input element. So I'm going to just add a bit of space. So input elements are used to configure several different types of form controls. They are not coded as a pair of opening and closing tags. They are standalone or void elements. So you will use the type attribute to specify the type of form element. So for example, we'll do input, and we'll say type equals, and we'll say text. And then we'll want to give it a name, and we can call this email, and then we can give it an ID, and we'll also call it email. This would be one example of an input element. In this case, it is allowing a box that you could type text into. Some common attributes of input elements are type, name, ID, size, max length, value, disabled, read-only, autocomplete, autofocus, list, placeholder, required, access key, and tab index. So let's hit save and we'll refresh. So here we have our text box that we could type into. And we could go ahead and we could add to this. Let's do required equals required. And so what would happen is if somebody were to forget to type into this and we were going to have a submit button, it would give us an error saying that we forgot to fill in this information. We'll look at some of these other attributes a little bit more. Size and max length, those are really good if you want to specify a certain amount of characters. This could be really helpful if you were, let's say, typing in an address and you were typing in a zip code, and a lot of times people might accidentally put in too many characters. So you could have a maximum length of however many characters that you wanted to make sure that somebody didn't go too far with the length. You could do the same thing with the state value. You could use autocomplete to populate the information. You could do a placeholder to kind of give an idea of what the information might look like. Access key and tab index can be really helpful for someone who's using assistive technology, so that way they could have access to that information by using a keyboard to quickly jump from section to section. So the next one we're going to take a look at is going to be submit and reset buttons. So these are also input types. So we'll do input type equals submit, and then we'll do input type equals reset. Go ahead and hit save, refresh. And here we can actually test out. I have the browser's default is to highlight the box that's not filled out, and it says please fill out this field. So we didn't have to do anything. Just by saying that we wanted it to be required, the browser's going to go ahead and do this, and we could actually test this out in another browser. Alright, so I have Firefox in the top, I have Chrome in the bottom. So it's going to look a little bit different. We still have this little pop-up message. It's not turning red, but it's giving us this error letting us know that this information's missing. You'll also notice there's a bit of a difference too based off of what text is here. So we have submit query here, and then we have just a regular submit button here. We can actually change these as well. So some attributes for these buttons: name, ID, value, access key, tab index. So one way that we could change these, we could do value equals subscribe. We could refresh these, and now these will say subscribe as the actual text on them. So this is where I was trying to say before, it can get a little bit confusing because you could have a value, which is the actual name that's on the button. We could have an ID, and we could have a name. And so you want to make sure you remember which one is going to be used for which. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start actually coding. What we're going to do is just kind of add information and turn it into a long form. So I'm going to delete all of this. We'll end up essentially recreating it as we go along. I'd like to start fresh. So we're going to create a form. And in the form opening tag, we're going to say name equals sample, say method equals post, ID equals sample, action equals demo.php, and we're just going to create a sample form. I'm going to return a couple of times, give us a little space. We're going to create an H1, we'll say sample form, and for now we're just going to type in text. We'll go back and we'll change these into labels later. So we're just going to type in email, and then we'll say input type equals text, name equals email, ID, ID equals email, and then we're going to add some breaks after this. And you don't necessarily have to use the same words. It might make it more sense to keep these the same. You and the backend developer would need to agree on the email. It might be up to you on what you want to have for the ID, so these wouldn't necessarily have to match if you didn't want them to. So let's save this, refresh. So we have our first part of our form, which is a text input where we can type in our email. And then we're going to create the bottom of our form. So as we add in inputs, we're going to place them in between. So we're going to do input type equals submit. We'll do a input type equals reset. And for each of these, for the submit, we'll add a name equals submit. We'll also add ID equals submit. For our reset, we'll do name equals reset, ID equals reset. If you wanted to, we could also add a value, just so you have this for your notes. Let's do subscribe. And then maybe reset, we could do clear form. So the next group of inputs we're going to look at is the checkbox and radio buttons. So what we're going to do is essentially add everything in between. So I'm going to return a little bit. And we'll just add each one underneath an H2 heading. And so let's actually go back up here and we'll do H2 and we'll say text, so that way we know it's a text input. So this will be essentially our first group. And then we would do an H2 here, and we would say checkbox. Checkbox and radio buttons allow the user to select one or more of a group of predetermined items. For the checkbox input type, you will often have the attributes name, ID, checked, value, disabled, autofocus, required, access key, tab, index. So before our input, we're going to actually add in text that says check all that apply. And we'll add in some breaks. We'll do input type equals checkbox. Name equals option 1. ID equals option 1. Value, I forgot my end quote. Value equals yes. So this is going to indicate if it's yes, no, essentially checked or unchecked. We'll do option 1 and we'll do a break. And we're going to create 3 different boxes so we can actually kind of see what this does in action. So we'll do another input type. If you want to copy this, you can, and just kind of tweak it. This time we'll do name equals option 2, ID equals option 2, value equals yes, and then we'll say option 2, add a break. So rather than typing all that, I'm going to copy this a 3rd time, and then I'll just tweak it, change this to 3, this to 3, and this to 3. Let's save, refresh. So now we have our 3 different options, and I'm actually going to add a few breaks right before our buttons. So we have a bit more space. So each one of these kind of works independently from each other. We can have all of them checked, we can have multiple ones checked. So they're all going to have a unique name and ID, and then the value will be set to yes. So it'll either be yes or no. So we'll kind of look at this in comparison with the radio button. Radio button allows users to select one choice from a group of predetermined items. They will have the same name and value attribute because only one of them can be selected. So if you select any of the other ones, it will essentially overwrite the previous one that was selected. The input type is called radio. Common attributes, name, ID, checked, value, disabled, autofocus required, access key, and tab index. So we'll create another H2. We'll call it radio buttons. This time we'll say choose the best answer. Add some breaks. Input type equals radio. Name equals. This time we'll just say option. Then we'll do ID equals option 4. Value equals OP4. I'm just doing this as kind of a shorthand. We could also have this be longer. Do option 4. So I'm going to take this and copy it 2 more times. And this time We still want each of these to have the same name. We'll change these options though, so the ID will be 5 and 6. So what's going to happen is they will overwrite each other. I'm going to change the value as well. They will overwrite each other, but we could still style them separately, and this is kind of bothering me. I want this all to be lowercase. So let's hit save, refresh. So now, oh, and I need to change these as well. 5, 6, refresh. So now we can only have one of them selected at a time. And they will all get sent to the same place. They'll get sent to the option area, wherever that is on the server side. And then it will acknowledge that whichever one's selected is the one that's active. The next two we're going to look at are hidden field and password boxes. The hidden field stores text or numeric information, but it is not visible in the browser viewport. It is only accessed through the client side or server side. So in this case, the input type is called hidden. Common attributes, name, ID, value, disabled. Then there's the password box, which is used to accept information that must be hidden as it is entered, such as a password. The input type on this is password. Common attributes, name, ID, size, max length, value, disabled, read-only, autocomplete, autofocus, placeholder, required access key in tab index. So we are going to add an H2. We'll call it hidden field and password boxes. Type in hidden field, give some breaks, input type equals hidden, name equals send to, ID equals send to, value equals order at site.com. So if we save and refresh this, we'll notice we again cannot actually see the input. It's completely hidden from the browser. It's something that's only seen on the back end, but it could still be a way to have information be sent to the server. Next we'll do password box. Input type equals password, name equals p-word. I'm just doing this because it's shorter. Again, you can kind of come up with the names. P-word. Do some breaks. Save, refresh. So now if we were to type inside of our password boxes, there will be kind of stand-in characters, so that way the information that's visible is hidden. So the next element we're going to look at is the text area element. So we're not working with input elements anymore. Add some space. The text area element creates a scrolling text box form control which accepts free form comments, questions, or descriptions. This one will have an opening and end tag, which would be called text area. Common attributes, name, ID, columns, rows. So you can actually specify how many columns, essentially characters, and kind of returns it has. Max length, disabled, read-only, autofocus, placeholder, required, wrap, hard or soft, access key, tab index. So let's create an H2. We'll call this text area element. And then we'll say comments. And then we'll do text area, give it a name, And I'm just going to do CM, kind of short for comment, ID, comment, CM. We'll do columns, 40, so it'll be kind of 40 characters, rows, kind of 2 lines. And we'll say enter comments. And we'll end this. So let's hit save, refresh. And if you look at our boxes in the different browsers, they'll be slightly different in size, even though they say they're the same. It might be a slight difference in the text size, but we have essentially kind of 2 lines and then enough space for 40 characters. There's enter comments already put in here kind of as filler text to give people an idea of what they should put in this. This might be a little inconvenient for people as they start typing. It ends up getting placed after the text. They might actually have to highlight it and delete it, so that might be a little annoying. Here we can click on the box though and resize it, so we have the default size. And what's nice about these boxes is if somebody wants to fill out a lot of information and be able to see everything at once, they can actually resize the box. Same thing here. We could resize this. Next, we're going to look at the select element and option element. You will also need this on the form for your final project. So pretty much each of these you'll end up needing to use for that final project. So the select element and option element actually work together. A select list is also known as a select box, drop-down list, drop-down box, and option box. So let's add H2. Let's say select list. We'll say select the best option. Create some breaks. So you start off with your select element, beginning and end tag, common attributes, name, ID, size, multiple, disabled, tab, index. So in this case, one that might be really useful is multiple. So if you were selecting multiple options from the drop-down list, and then within your selection list, you'll have your actual options, which are the choices people can choose. Contains and configures an option item displayed in the select list form control. And it's going to have an opening and end tag as well. Common attributes, value selected, disabled. So we're going to go back to our opening select tag. We're going to add size equals 1, name equals option list. Actually, I'm going to do that lowercase. Option list. ID equals also option list. And then we have our first option. And we'll say value is going to be equal to option 7. And then in between our tags, I'm going to type in option 7. We can copy this 2 more times, and we'll just swap this out to 8, 9, save and refresh these pages. So by default, you'll see the first option, and if we click, we can choose from this list. So this is a really great option if you have a lot to choose from. You technically could do a checkbox or a radio button. Let's say somebody was filling out an address form and they were choosing the state that they live in. It would take them a really long time to have to scroll through all of the different options. If it was a radio or checkbox, it would take up a lot of screen space versus here, we still have the option of seeing everything, but it would end up kind of hiding the options if we don't need them at the time. So it can be really great for options that are, again, kind of predetermined, but ones that we don't have to see all the time. We're going to create another list, and let's copy up until, we'll do select the best option, we'll have our 3, we'll copy all of this, and then we're going to tweak it a little bit. So we'll still say select the best option. This time, instead of size being 1, we'll do size as 3. And then we'll just change these to continue with the numbers. 10, 11, 12, save, refresh. So here we can actually see 3 options at the same time. If we had more than that, we could still kind of scroll through, but maybe there's going to be top choices that are more likely than others for people to pick. So we might choose this. This might end up being confusing. People might think there's only these options though. For example, let's change this to 2. So now we still have 3 options, but you have to scroll through to find those other options. So someone might not know that they need to actually look further for that 3rd option. So be a little careful with those. Next, we're going to look at the label element. This is a container tag that associates a text description with a form control. So you're going to match up the text descriptions on forms with their corresponding form controls. It's really great for assistive technology, again, to structurally organize information that is paired with each other. There's kind of 2 different ways to write these. You can bookend your input, so we can do that first. So let's go back up to our email option. Alright, so here we have our email text input. And what we're going to do is bookend the input. So right before our input, we're going to create a label. So I'm going to type in label, and this will be our opening tag. It'll contain the text that we want to have, and then it will contain the input, and then after our input, we will have our end tag for our label, and then we can keep our breaks. So we're keeping the same text, we're just putting it into a label that will structurally pair it. So again, we'll hit save, refresh. So it looks pretty much the same, but now it's actually paired with each other. Now there's another option, which is the for attribute, which allows the label to be associated without being right next to the input element. So how this might look, I'm going to just do this right below it, is you would type in label, and this time say for, and then we would say email. And then we would type in our text, and then we would enter label, and then below it is where we put our input, type, text, name, so there could be other things in between. Maybe there's a picture, there could be all sorts of stuff in between, but now they're still associated with each other, but they can be separate from each other and not have to be bookended within the label. So it's kind of up to you which one you want to choose. Both are going to be valid, but just make sure, you need to make sure that your for equals is going to match the text that you're choosing. So we could do this for each of these. So instead, I wouldn't worry about this. Check all that apply. That's sort of directions, but what we could do is we could add label option 2, have our input, change this back here to the end tag. Then just kind of do this for each. Save this, take a look. So you'll notice they kind of swapped places. Before the check marks were over here, now they're over here. It's kind of up to you on which you prefer. You might like having the boxes in front instead. The option behind. So you still have all the boxes kind of lined up with each other. You could do that if you wanted to. Kind of like how that looks better. So as long as you have both nested within the label, you're fine. So I would encourage you to practice that with the rest. I'm not going to worry about going through all of them with you. Your homework examples will help you practice that more as well. Next, we're going to look at the field set element and the legend element. The field set element groups elements of a similar purpose together, rendering a visual cue such as an outline or border around the form elements. This is really helpful for organizing information, especially if you have a larger form. A good example, and this is sort of based off the one in your textbook, would be an address form where you have all your information. So you might be filling out an order form and you have your mailing address and then you also have your billing address. So you could have a field set that groups together everything for your mailing address, and then you could also have everything, or I should say your shipping address, and then everything for your billing address. So we're going to hit save, but we're going to create a new file. I'm going to save as, and let's call this address.html. Title, we'll call this address form. Leave room for embedded styles. So start off with, we're going to do an H2. We'll say field, set, and legend. Now the legend is grouped together with the field set, and it helps by providing a text description for the field set grouping. So it's similar to a caption. So we have our H2. We're going to create a field set, opening and end tags. And then we're going to start with our legend, which will essentially be our caption. We'll call this address form. I'm going to hit save, and then I'm going to make sure I open this up. And let's open it in Google Chrome as well. So here you can actually see we have this box that's going to be containing everything within the field set, and then we also have this nice caption that is kind of breaking up. That's kind of following that line. Alright, next we're going to add a label, and we'll call this street. Input type equals text. And to make this a little easier, I'm going to stretch this out. I'm going to full screen this for now, and then we'll kind of go back and look at it once it's ready. So input type text name is equal to street ID equals street size 54. So in this case, the textbook has chosen to pick kind of a larger number for the size, and that's just because depending on the address, somebody could have a very long number or word or name for their street address, so it's to give them plenty of space to type before they run out without it being kind of unmanageably large. Right, next we're going to create another label. This time it will be for the city. I accidentally hit my caps lock. Input type, do text name, call this city, the city, then we'll end our label, create a couple breaks, then we'll do label state, input type state name be state ID state. Then this time we're going to add in max length. It's going to be 2. So it's going to be the abbreviations. Okay, so I is 5. Enter label, create our breaks. Then we're going to do a label zip code, input type text, name, zip code, ID, zip code, max length, going to be equal to 5, size, also 5, enter label, and then add some breaks. And then we have our end field set. And I didn't mention this while we were typing it, but there are a couple of inputs where we can actually choose a different type. So in this case, we can choose state as a type rather than having it be text. There's a couple other ones that you'll encounter as well. So I'm going to move this back over, hit save, refresh. So now we can actually see all of our text boxes. So this is an example of how you could use the field set to group together information. We're going to do an example from page 330, I believe. So we could create a new file, hit save. This one we can call contact. Oh, and I think contact.html, doc type, we'll do contact form as the title. This time we won't worry about doing a field set. And I'm going to hit save and we'll open this as well. So in the body, create an H1 contact us. We'll do form. We'll practice our attribute for. So we'll do label for my name. We'll create name as our label. We'll do input type equals text. Name equals my name, so they match. ID equals my name. So that would be one pair. And then we have label for equals my email. And then we will type in email and our label, put our input type equals text. Name equals my email. And I'm doing camel casing so it's easier to tell when it's two different words. It's common in other programming languages. It's not necessarily as common in HTML and CSS, but it's kind of a good habit to get into. So you have name equal and then ID equals my name. And that do label for this one will be my comments. And then we'll end it and put, oh, and this time instead of doing an input element, we'll do text area. We'll say name, my comments, ID, my comments, rows, 2, columns, 20. And then we'll end with the text area. And then at the very bottom, we'll do input type, submit, value will also be submit. And we could also add in input type equals reset. I don't think the example in the book has this, but we might as well. So we're gonna hit save, refresh. And then they want us to go ahead and add in some styles. So we'll go ahead and do that. So they want us to do a form style, a label style, input style, and text area style. And it actually looks like they have a style for the submit button, so we might actually want to remove the reset because it looks like they haven't provided a style for us to use for that. So we'll just remove that. So how we're going to type in the style for the submit button is we are going to type in input, and then we'll do our straight brackets, no spaces, type equals submit, and then submit, end straight bracket, and then we'll do our curly brackets. Alright, so starting with our form, we want to add in the background color, and we'll do EA, EA, EA. Font, family, Arial, sans serif. Width, 350 pixels. Padding, 10 pixels. Label, float, left. We also want clear left. So rather than all moving across the screen, they're going to stack up over top of each other, I believe. Display as being block. Width 100 pixels. Padding right 10 pixels. Margin top 10 pixels. Text align right. For the input, we're also going to display as a block element. We're also going to display as block. Margin top 10 pixels. For text area, we're going to also do display as block. Also margin top. And then for our submit button, we're going to do margin left 110 pixels. So let's give that a look. So what we've done is we've created this colored box to contain all of our information. We've added a little bit of padding, so there's a little bit more space. For our labels, we have them floating to the left, and they're clearing, they're displaying as block. They have a specific width. What's kind of nice is they are kind of close to the boxes rather than being all kind of left aligned. They're next to the boxes, which makes them a little bit easier to see what they're associated with, even though they kind of don't line up over here, which could be a little bit hard to read for some. So that's where we have the text align. For the inputs, they're just block, and then there's a bit of spacing between them, and it's even with the rest, so that way they all line up still. Same with the text area. And then the margin left is just making sure the button is lining up with everything else. So for example, if we change this to 10, now it's all the way over to the left, so it just doesn't look as good. So your textbook has a couple of other types of inputs that they look at, which are going to be a little bit more advanced. Some of them could be quite helpful for your final project. For example, there is an email address input form, which it would be input type equals email. So you could use that instead of just having a generic text. So it would be able to recognize if something is an email or not. You can also do a URL form input control to show whether or not you're typing in a URL address. You can do telephone number, which is TEL, which is helpful for recognizing a telephone number. You can also create a search input form control. The input type for that would be search. One that we're going to take a look at is the data list element. Now this requires HTML5, and it's used to suggest predefined input values to a web page visitor. Browsers that can't support it will render the form control as a text box. So some of the ones that are later in the chapter and the ones that we're going to be looking at now they aren't supported by older browsers, and so they're not necessarily going to always look the same, but there is sort of a default option of how they'll look instead. So let's again create a new file. Let's save this as let's do form 5. My thought being HTML5 form elements. I'm just going to say form elements. Alright, so in the body section, we will type in h1. Choose your favorite color. And we'll create a form. Type in label for color, favorite color in the label. Then we'll create our input type equals text, name, color, ID, color, list, colors. And then we'll create our data list element. Data list ID equals colors. So here you'll see this being referenced. Here we have the list equals colors, and so here we have our ID colors. It's being associated. And then we have option, and we're just going to list some common colors. Red, green, blue, yellow, pink, cyan. Then we want to make sure we end our data list. And then let's do a submit and reset. Submit name, submit ID, submit value, enter. Then our input type equals reset. Name equals reset. So go ahead and hit save, refresh. So here we could type in a value. In Chrome, we're actually seeing this drop down and it's showing us a couple of different options. If I click on this, so I can't necessarily see it. If I wanted to, I could start typing in. If I type in a letter, it'll kind of bring up common answers. Here, I did notice, let's refresh this again. Oh, it's kind of hidden, I guess, but if you click on the right, just in the right spot, it should show this drop-down list. And here again, we have this list here. So that's the data list. Next, we'll look at slider and spinner controls. So after our data list. Let's create some space. So with the slider input form control, it provides a visual interactive user interface that accepts numerical information. The input type is range. There are several attributes: max, minimum, and step. Step meaning how you increase the intervals. So do you step up by 1, by 2, by 5, by 10? Maximum and minimum being the maximum and minimum values that you will have for numbers, the default being from 0 to 100. In newer browsers, it will show as a slider. In Internet Explorer, it will be a text field. So after here, let's do a couple of breaks. And then we'll do an H1. And we'll say, choose a number. So we'll create label for my choice. Choose number between 1 and 100, which is the default. We'll enter label. We'll create break. Then we'll say low input type equals range min 1 and max is 100. Name equals my choice. ID equals my choice. And then high. So low and high are just kind of to help indicate the size of the slider. And then we'll create a couple breaks. So save, refresh. So we're kind of by default starting in the center, and then we can kind of choose a low or a high number. Next, we're going to look at the spinner control, which displays an interface that accepts numerical information and provides feedback to the user. So this could be handy for maybe volume, or if you're trying to add a type of effect and you want to do less or more, you don't necessarily need to know the exact amount. This next one will help us actually have more visual feedback. So we'll do input type is going to be number. And again, we have minimum, max, and step. So do H1, choose a number again. Do label for my choice 2. Choose a number between 1 and 10. Input type is going to be number. Name is equal my choice 2. ID equals my choice 2. Minimum is equal to 1. Max is going to be equal to 10. And then we'll create a couple breaks. Hit save, refresh. So here we have some arrows to help us step up and down between our values. This one in Chrome is invisible unless we are hovering, and then we can see it. We could also type in a number if we wanted to. This is not an either or. Alright, so next we're going to take a look at calendar and color well controls. HTML5 provides a variety of calendar form controls to accept date and time related information. You can look at date, date time local, time, month, or week. So let's go ahead and add this below. Whoops, not there. Here. Let's do H1. Choose a date. We'll do label for my date. Choose a date. Then we'll enter label, and then we'll do input type equals date. Name equals my date. ID equals my date. Let's hit save, refresh. So now we can choose a date, and if we click on it, here we can kind of type in, but we can also click through and choose a date. Same here. Kind of click through and change it. Let's add a couple breaks. And then we'll look at the ColorWell form control. ColorWell form control displays an interface that offers a color picker interface to the user. This uses the input element with type is equal to color. So we'll do H1, choose a color label for my color, choose a color. And then we'll do input type equals color, name equals my color, ID equals my color. Add our breaks. Save, refresh. So now we can click on this color and choose between basic colors, custom colors, and then we have our spectrum, which it looks like we have hue, saturation, or luminosity, which this is similar to what we've looked at. Luminosity also being called lightness or brightness. And then we have red, green, blue as options. Here we can click on this as well, and it kind of shows the same thing. Alright, so this is going to cover everything that we're going to go over for form elements. Make sure that you go through the examples in the textbook. You are going to be required to add forms to your homework assignments and then also to the final project. And while we're actually talking about that, let me bring up the final project assignment, just because this will probably make a little bit more sense than the first time we took a look at it. So if we go back to this idea of which forms you're going to need to include, it's going to be up to you what's going to make the most sense with your form page. Is it going to be a quiz? Is it going to be an order form? Is it going to be a way to subscribe to find out more information? Is it going to be a contact form where you request assistance or services or more information? It's going to be up to you, but you're going to need to have a text input type. So something where someone will just type in information. It could be an email, a submit button and a reset button, a checkbox and radio button. So you need to have a couple of different options for people to choose. It could be what is their preferred method of contact. It could be their preferred choice based off of the information on your page. Input type date. And then you'll also need a text area, so an area where someone could type in comments or a question. And then probably the one that gets forgotten the most is this bottom one, which is select an option. So that's that drop-down menu where you have at least 3 different options to choose from. So make sure you include all of those. You also need to have matching label elements for all of your form elements. So you want to make sure that you include all of those as well. So if you have any questions about what would work best for your final project for the forms, go ahead and email me and we can talk and I can help give you advice based off of what your topic ends up being. Alright, so that's going to be all for this video.